zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your question comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. Every single person who has ever been born in the world, anywhere, anytime, any place, has one thing in common. Every one of them was born an atheist. None of us come to religion on our own conclusion or by any experience or by any meeting with any of the 20,000 plus gods ever created by our ancestors throughout history. We're taught religion by the culture that we are born into and the time and the geography of our birth. Most of us, that is. A few of us are fortunate enough to escape it. But for the most part, we're indoctrinated. And then a few of us start to give serious consideration to what we've been taught. We start to question it. And again, we return to atheism. You're listening to the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network. I'm your host, Ed Golly, joined by Jim Peterson, Joe Reinhardt, and our guest in the studio today is Jim Young. Jim is important because he was radicalized, I think it'd be safe to say, into Christianity and became a
Christian fundamentalist, evangelical,
who would scare the pants off you in one of his sermons, and then became an atheist and is now a member of Atheists of Florida. If you would like to talk to him today, you can call us in at 441-3000 in Pinellas County. That's the 727 area code. And we want to hear his story about how he became an absolutely avid fundamentalist Christian and then eventually become an atheist. I think your story, Jim, is a little more radical than that I hear from most people. I say that because I, fortunately, was never indoctrinated into religion, but I'm one of the few people I know who can make that claim.
Well, my indoctrination was typical of many Christian families. I was raised by Christian parents who bundled us up and sent us off to Sunday school on Sunday mornings, and we also attended church. But really, religion did not take hold until I was around 16 years old. And as a teenager, I had many problems because I lived in an abusive home with an abusive stepfather.
Oh,
and
really?
Most teenage children are going to have a lot of problems if they are living in an abusive home. I had a sister who became involved in the Southern Baptist Church here in the Tampa Bay area, and she encouraged me to attend Southern Baptist Church with her, so I began to go there. And of course, the preacher there emphasized trusting in Jesus and letting Jesus take all of your burdens and problems away. So I, having a lot of problems, decided that might not be a bad idea. So I did make this commitment to Christianity. And a funny thing happened to me. I plunged in head over heel and became an instant fanatic. And the reason for that was that I thought, well, now, if this is real, if this God actually exists, I need to act as though he really does exist. If I'm to have a personal relationship with this God, I have to dedicate my life and not reserve it for myself. I need to dive in head first, completely submerge myself into discovering the will of God for my life. So as a young and brash teenager, I decided, well, I've been anointed by the Holy Spirit, and I'm called to live my life in service to God as a preacher. And I immediately began to preach. Of course, even though I was in a Southern Baptist church, they were not comfortable with my fanaticism because I was critical of them not being dedicated enough to God, that I criticized their selfishness. And so I was actually unwelcome fairly soon, and I began to search for a better answers. I wanted to know the truth because there seemed to be a lot of inconsistencies that I was struggling with. One of the inconsistencies was the fact that there were many, many different Christian denominations, and they could not agree with each other on what the Bible said. This was an enormous problem for someone who is sincerely seeking to know what the answer is, the true answer, and not the wrong answer. I was heavily criticized for taking that position, but I did persist in attending numerous different Christian denominations and inquiring about their beliefs and listening to their arguments in support of their beliefs. To make this story a little shorter, I ultimately progressed more and more fanatical, and eventually I ended up in a Pentecostal faith. These are people who believe in speaking of tongues and laying on of hands and anointing with oil and all sorts of things. And essentially it can be boiled down to one sentence. Their faith believes that if you were a friend of the world, you were the enemy of God. So complete separation. Wow. And this is an extreme position, but it's the position that I took. Even though I was in this fundamentalist Pentecostal faith, I was still viewed as a fanatic, an extremist. But I persisted because God, I believed, had anointed me, and I was to carry his message forward, which I did. However, I continued to have problems with some inconsistencies between my faith and what was written in the Bible.
May I ask, why did you believe that God had anointed you? In most cases, when you say anoint, you mean putting oil or water on somebody's head and declaring that they have a mission of some kind. How did that happen to you?
Well, I can only speculate and say that psychologically, I wanted to believe that I was special. And so if this was, and besides that, what are you going to do with your life if now you have dedicated your life to faith in this God? You pretty much have to pursue that as a career, which I did.
Yeah, another point I just want to interject briefly, and that is the idea that you had a calling. You know, if you'd wanted to become a brain surgeon or specialize in infant cancer or childhood diseases, you have to do that on your own. You're just left to your own designs there. But if you want to go out and preach the word, you have a special calling. You get assistance from the Almighty.
And speaking of calling, listeners, you can call in at 727-441-3000 if you'd like to participate, or if you have questions for our guest, Jim Young.
And if you're outside our immediate area, you can call in toll free at 866-826-1340. 866-826-1340. Call now.
So my religious ministry consisted of a fire and brimstone preaching style in the Pentecostal churches that I went to, and on the street, wherever I could meet people. And even though I was so deeply involved in this, I was carrying the burden of the fact that I still saw inconsistencies in what the various Christian faiths taught and in what the scriptures taught. And I came to believe, contrary to the particular church that I was a member of and active in, I came to believe that all Christians of any faith, any Christian faith, were children of God and Christians and were saved. And now this was contradictory to the church that I was in, because they were very exclusive, that our particular church was the only church that actually accepted and believed the truth in the Bible, and everyone else was actually working for the devil. And
I'd like to point out that the one true religion that you just spoke of, the one correct denomination, the one that is actually in communication with the Almighty, is only one out of 35,000 different Christian denominations that you might pick from. So be careful that you don't pick the wrong one.
Each of which is the only one that you could possibly
As opposed to the
choose.
other true religion right down the street. Yes.
That's right.
And I found that by visiting other churches and hearing their arguments, which was actually also prohibited, you were not supposed to entertain the arguments because that was tempting your faith. But I did do that, trying to discover better answers. And I ultimately came to the conclusion that the Bible actually was flawed, and that it was up to me and God to reveal to me the truth. And I relied heavily on the scripture that seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened. So I was desperately seeking. Now, one of the things that broke the camel's back was the bigotry within the Christian faith, not only in the church that I was a member of, but also in the various churches that I visited. So if I went to a Southern Baptist church, they would vilify Catholics. They would vilify Mormons. They would vilify Jehovah's Witness. If you went to the Pentecostal church, they would vilify everybody. And if you went to a Jehovah Witness Kingdom of Hall, they would say, well, all of these churches of Christendom are of the devil. They are the deceivers.
And so we shudder to think what their appraisal of Muslims would be. Right?
Oh, really? Well, if you're a sincere person seeking to find the best answers, and you're faced with this dilemma that everybody is accusatory of everybody else of being evil, and I'm the only one going to hell. I mean, I kind of had taken that position. I'm the only one going to heaven. And I realized this cannot be possible. This is absurd. There's no way that this can be possible. So I actually confided in some of the other pastors that I knew that I did not accept literally everything that the Bible taught, because it was contradictory, and it was up to us to, through prayer and meditation, to figure it all out and discern what was the real answer. Well, the moment that I said that, I became public enemy number one. But the other thing that bothered me was the hate that spewed forth from the pulpit each Sunday morning. We were in a fundamentalist church. It was rather extreme, and blacks were vilified at every opportunity. Yes, gays were vilified at every. It was pure hate. It was so hateful that even though that I was a racist myself, I mean, I had been raised to be a racist Christian, and it bothered me. And I'm thinking, well, gee, is this really love? Is this really what God wants? So I thought to myself, I think I need to go to a Black church, meet these people, because I had not been to a Black church. I've been to a lot of different denominations, but they were always white. So I decided to go. I went to a Black church in Fayetteville, North Carolina one Sunday morning, and they welcomed me with open arms. It was a wonderful, it was a fantastic experience. And they were singing these gospel songs. The music in this place was really rocking. It wasn't rock and roll, but these people were really having a great time. And I was the only white face amongst them. And they treated me like I was just one of them. And I had a wonderful time. And I left that church saying to myself, racism is wrong. I've got to completely change. I am not going to be a racist anymore. In fact, I need to re-examine all of my values. I need to re-examine my faith in view of the fact that I've been so wrong about so many different things.
So your religion made the Trump administration look like the poster child for the love generation of the 60s, right?
Sort of.
Here is a message, Facebook posting from a young woman I know who's in her early 20s and basically distantly related to me. I want to read it to you and see what you would advise this young woman to do. I am a Christian, and I love Jesus Christ despite the fact that I'm human and come short of his glory. I believe that Jesus, the Son of God, was crucified on the cross, died for my sins, and rose again on the third day to give me salvation. He loves me dearly and forgave my sins. His word, the Holy Bible, says, if I deny him before men, he will deny me before his Father in heaven. This is the best challenge I've ever seen on Facebook. So if you love him and you're not ashamed, copy and paste. This sounds like you back at about that same age.
About the same age. And I was a very hateful person at this time because everyone around me that did not agree with me, I felt they were going to hell. Mm-hmm. And this kind of upset me to the point that one day I looked in the mirror and I said, you're a nasty excuse for a human being. For somebody, wow. For somebody who aspires to be a good person, you're the sorriest excuse for a good person that is imaginable. What kind of world would it be like if everyone were like you? Oh, and I was horrified. So I said, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write down some of the values that I would like to aspire to as a child of God. And so I began to write down, and one of the very first things is that I wanted to recognize that all people had inalienable rights to freedom, equality, and social justice, and that any attempt by anybody or any institution to deny people this freedom, equality, and social justice, that was evil.
Well, now these sound like secular values. These very much are the kind of values that those sitting around this table pretty much share. And so how do you think you picked up after the intense immersion in this religious atmosphere, you were able to deduce that these kinds of values overrode some of your religious thinking?
Well, when I made this list, and it was a little bit exhaustive, I decided that I now will go into the Bible and I will find the scriptures that support my position. In other words, I'm going to start with the conclusion, and then I will go dig up the evidence. That's the Christian way. And I did search and search and search, and I could not find evidence supporting my position. I had become a heretic. At that point, I said to myself, well, you know, a major reshaping of my thinking is taking place, and I need to question everything, but I'm making this promise. There's one thing that is not negotiable, and that is my faith and belief in God and in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I'm not giving that up. But in the context of being a God-fearing and believing Christian, I'm going to seek for better answers. Well, the more I sought for better answers, the more I found them.
You know, I know we've been accused on more than one occasion of trying to take away people's religion, of trying to deprive them of their religion. It is clearly not possible to take away someone's religion. It's something that they have to voluntarily concede of their own volition, and they do that because ultimately the evidence is so overwhelming that in many cases they just the dam breaks and there's nothing they can do to stop it. So the idea that we are attempting to deprive people of anything is in fact very far from the truth, and for the simple reason that we can't deprive anyone of their religion. It's something they have to give away of their own.
The religious protection built into the First Amendment is protection, as we often said, that applies not to churches, not to doctrines, but to individual people. Your religion, your religious ideas, whatever they might be, rest in your head. And it's your ability to hold these ideas and to talk about them publicly that is protected by the Constitution.
I shared my thoughts with a Methodist minister, and he said, Jim, you need to abandon Christian fundamentalism, and you need to move your ministry into the Methodist Church because they're extremely liberal. And at the time they were. He says, you can believe anything. You can be a heretic. You can get away with it. They don't care. So I said, hey, that's a great idea. So I actually did do that.
So much for intellectual purity.
I came back to the Tampa Bay area and I obtained a license to preach in the Methodist Church and joined a local Methodist church. And I was starting to liberalize in my thinking. And my sermons, instead of being fire and brimstone sermons now designed to make people feel bad about themselves and guilty and fearful, they were about love. Okay. And so I basically openly dismissed all of the thou shalt nots in the Bible, every one of them. There is no, this is all bogus. And my emphasis was on thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, this was kind of over the top, and it was pretty simple.
You're taking those out of context.
But yes, I was taking those out of context, and I was still finding there was some resistance, because even in this Christian liberal church, there were people that thought that I had kind of lost it completely and gone crazy. When you can turn around and say that the Bible is BS, how can you be a Christian? This is crazy. And it was crazy, but I'm off on this tangent, and I'm trying to justify staying inside the Christian faith. And I was failing. Eventually, over time, my wife said to me one day, I'm thinking that I don't want to be the wife of a minister. And I turned to her and I said, I'm thinking I don't want to be a minister anymore. So that was it. That was when, then I began to tell people that I was agnostic, that I was on the fence, kind of, and I got away with that for a while. But eventually, in the 1990s, when Jerry Falwell and the moral majority began to crusade against human rights and bash everybody who was different, I'm listening to this, and I told my wife, listen to this. That was me. That was me. I was this same type of individual. I need to make penance. I need to fight against this. And so I joined the Democratic Party. The moment I joined the Democratic Party, I started getting mail, junk mail, from all kinds of liberal organizations. Amongst them was the American Humanist Association.
Wow.
And the Secular Humanist Association. And the Secular Humanist Association offered me a free copy of the Humanist, the Secular Humanist. So I had this postcard. I said, I don't know what the hell this is, but I'm going to send it off. I sent it off, and it came in the mail, a magazine, and I opened the front cover, and there was a list of the tenets of the philosophy of humanism, which I had never heard of before in my life.
Wow. And at what age did this happen? This was in what, your late 20s to early 30s?
No, I'm up there now.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, look, we're going to take a short break and let our listeners hear a little bit about the Atheists of Florida, who puts on this program. And then we're going to continue with our guest, Jim Young, who's going to tell us how he went from rabid religionist to sane atheist. Here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We'll be back in just a moment. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com.
Here I come, me that used to be such fun.
On the Tan Talk Radio Network, it's the Atheist Forum. There's no other program quite like it, and we appreciate your listening. If you'd like to check in with us and suggest that Jim take a nap on the streetcar tracks, that's fine. 441-3000 connects you, and you can tell him what you think about his experience with religion, which eventually brought him back to atheism. And just in case we're wrong, you can get our Get Out of Hell free card simply by calling us at the same number. Give us your address, and we'll mail you that and a lot of other fun things from the Atheist Forum, delivered to your doorstep by uniform messenger, and it will cost you nothing. The New Yorker this week has put out an extensive expose on the press secretary of the Trump administration, Sarah Sanders. And we have her quote, a quote from her, I should say, today here on the forum. Joe?
Yes, sir. I have it right here in my hand.
Good. Put it in your mouth and spit it out.
Here it comes. From Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the preacher's daughter, lying like he taught her. One of the things that makes Americans unique is that we value life. We think each life has intrinsic value and worth, whether you are a baby in the womb or an elderly woman, unless, of course, that you live in Puerto Rico, in which case it's strictly go for yourself, in spite of the wonderful underappreciated efforts that we have made there.
Or unless you live in the Middle East, where it's estimated that between 100,000 and 400,000 citizens of Iraq were killed, none of whom ever posed any threat to this country, suggested any threat to this country, or had the ability to implement any threat to this country. But because they are the wrong religion, they were dispensable for profits.
But we should, in all fairness, note that those last number of bits were actually not a quote from Sanders. She
That's
didn't
correct.
exempt Puerto Rico.
Yes,
No,
right.
But that was our allusion to
All right.
the
I hope I
consequences.
wasn't. I hope my sarcasm meter went off there.
It dripped.
At least enough to explain.
But the thing is that the most prominent exports of this nation is militarism, military hardware. You know, if we are such a peace-loving nation and value every life so much, why are we building all this weaponry and bombs and missiles and delivery systems?
Right.
It seems like we would take the exact opposite position and try to eliminate the production of that all over the world. Does
We
the
get
word
some-
hyperocracy mean anything
Yeah,
to you?
right. No, I mean, we get some sort of appeal from some third world country about the starvation levels and the lack of education and the problems with disease or insect-borne disease. And our general response to that is, well, how many machine guns do you need?
Yeah.
As the world exists now, it is more integrated than it ever has been before in terms of international relationships. We have to work on problems internationally and closely with our friends and neighbors to defeat hunger in the world, to defeat the pulse of overpopulation, which is creating such havoc, and of course the climate system, the agreement that was reached in Paris, and so forth. The present administration, of course, takes strong exemption to all these things. And it exemplifies the fact that our people are insufficiently well educated about these issues. And it's urgent that they become more educated. One of the things we're trying to do here with this program is, in some small way, with the things that we discuss, we hope to trigger you into doing more research, making yourself aware and conscious of the problems of our age. And not the least of which is the hold that religion has on the minds of so many, and creates a large barrier to reconciling all of these difficulties and problems that we're trying to overcome.
Well, as I was saying about the my path to atheism, I had received a magazine from these secular humanists, and in the inside cover was a list of the tenets of humanism, and I read those tenets, and I was flabbergasted because every single one of those tenets was in harmony with my own personal beliefs. And I thought to myself, what? I'm a humanist, and I didn't even know what a humanist was. So I immediately got in touch with the humanists locally, and I started to associate with them. And I found out that many of them were atheists. Well, they all were, in fact. So I said, well, you know, I'm willing to admit I'm an atheist too now. I mean, there's no point in pretending anymore to believe when I really don't. So I went to some meetings of the Atheists of Florida, and the next thing you know, I was serving on the board of directors of Atheists of Florida. And being an evangelist preacher at heart, I wanted to continue to do evangelism in the name of atheism, even though atheism is not a philosophy. I wanted to try to educate people so that they would have the capacity to think critically and
But yeah,
reject
you're quite right, because atheism is nothing more than a rejection of all of these supernatural concepts that our ancestors dreamed up, which I think they did not as much for control, but to try to explain the visible universe that they lived in, for which they lacked adequate science to understand it. And then it evolved into a control mechanism that we saw all through the Dark Ages of Western Europe. And now we see a very adamant effort to reinstate that among the culture of the United States for control.
I think there are a large number of ministers who are virtually enslaved, trapped in their position, just like a lot of people want to work long enough to get their health insurance and their pension and so on. And a lot of ministers find themselves in the same situation because they either say what they're told to say or they have to find another job. And so when you come to see the light, shall we say, it's not just a matter, in many cases, of coming to grips with it yourself. The costs can be tremendous. It can cost you your house, your family, your wife, your children, all of your friends, virtually everyone you've ever known, your retirement, your job, your respect in the community. I mean, it takes a good deal of courage to come out as a non-believer. And there are, in fact, halfway houses sort of for recovering ministers as we speak. What did it cost you?
Well, it cost me friends and it cost me family because my daughter was a Christian fundamentalist and she eventually got tired of associating with a father who was an atheist, and she wrote me a letter and told me she never wanted to hear from me again. So I have not had any contact with her, and my grandchildren I've never seen. I had lost many friends who were devout Christians who took literally the scriptures in the New Testament Bible that if you should not associate with people who are non-believers because that they are messengers of the devil. So there is a price to pay in people who are, and they know it. People instinctively know that because they have, if they were devout Christians, they disassociated themselves with atheists for the same reasons.
Exactly.
And so they know that if they admit that they don't believe anymore, they're going to attack them. They're going to say, well, you never were a Christian. You never
There's
were.
something wrong with you.
There's something wrong with you. You
Yeah,
never
of
were a
course.
Christian. You really never did give your life
Wow.
to Jesus. You never had faith, and you're just angry at God.
This is how we know when someone says, I'm a skeptic or a free thinker or an atheist or a non-believer. We know that they're telling the truth because the rewards for atheism are, I have yet to discern any, even though I'm only into atheism for the money. I admit it. I admit it. But
It's clear that isn't working out
it
too
hasn't
well.
worked out well so far, but I'm persistent.
There's great promise in the future.
Nevertheless, the rewards for at least saying that you believe in the highly improbable can be tremendous. So they can run well into the hundreds of millions of dollars in rewards. And so it's just a point to be made that one of the things about atheists, although we are an abomination, we understand that.
I think
But
that there are
But at least we're
rewards.
honest about it.
There are rewards to being an atheist.
Sure. there are.
And when you become an atheist, you begin to realize those rewards. And one of them is freedom of conscience. You have the freedom to seek best answers rather than dogma. or absolute truths. And many of the questions and issues that we're faced with are complex questions. And they don't come with black and white or simple answers. And so that you have to gather as much data as possible and try to decide upon a sound judgment based on the data. And I note that people who are absolutists, they tend to try to convert other people to their way of thinking using fear and prejudice and hate and demagoguery and all sorts of tools of deception, because they have the view that they wish to deny other people, the ability to make an informed decision. But now when you're free of religion, you have the ability to listen to many different points of view and to use your critical thinking skills to try to find the best answer.
Objectivity.
You cannot say that it's the absolute truth.
So would you say that one of the principal benefits is the realization of your full human potential? That is your ability to think critically and your the reconciliation of your intellectual capabilities with the outside world. But of course, it's always distressing and deeply tragic to lose family members or to lose family because of this. And it is part of a heavy price that sometimes people have to pay. But on the other hand, the opportunity to do things like this, to educate people so that more and more people become more tolerant. What you're talking about is intolerance, so a lack of ability for people to imagine that somebody with different ideas than their own might be equally deserving of being treated humanely.
Well,
And don't you think, Jim, that that's because the Christian feels threatened by those of us who are able to live our lives free of the dogma of religion and its tenets and its fear of repercussions for sin and that type of thing?
They are afraid. They're afraid of being confronted by the fact that they're wrong. They don't want to be able to admit that they're wrong, and they're afraid of losing power and control. I think that one of the greatest things for me, because I have always been a very spiritual person, and I'm not meaning spiritual in any supernatural sense, but I'm referring to it as a psychological well-being in my pursuit of ethical ideals and values and my conduct and behavior towards other human beings. I have found that religion, because it is dogmatic and because it will not tolerate any differences of opinion, stifles spiritual growth. You cannot find better answers if you are prohibited by the church that you attend from seeking better answers. You cannot grow spiritually if you are prohibited from questioning, and you cannot grow spiritually if you are prohibited from disagreeing with the official position of any Christian faith. So from that point of view, people are far better off spiritually if they have the ability, if they abandon religion and dogma and just simply say, I'm going to do the best I can with all of the information, seek out my own answers, and I will decide. I will be the ultimate arbitrator, not a holy book and not some church. And most certainly, if people are objective, they have to admit the Bible is contradictory. And people who take it and twist it and turn it and manipulate it to say whatever they want it to say, they're not willing to admit that the Bible suddenly becomes meaningless and invalid in their hands because they nullify any scripture they want to. And for example, I'll just mention one. Jesus promised, I'm coming soon. No Christian will accept that prophecy as literally meaning I'm coming soon. So they are rejecting the very literal words of Jesus and his intent to put something in place of their own making, only because they know it's false.
It's an example of how deeply entrenched those ideas are. I mean, people who will absolutely not admit that after 2,000 years they've been stood up. You gotta be pretty set in your ways.
Well, if you can't believe Jesus, you can't believe anything in the Bible.
Now, that's an interesting point.
Well, really, what can you believe? Because I can quote scripture after scripture after scripture that Christians will not abide. They will not accept that it says what it says. They have to say, oh, well, we need to give some metaphorical meaning or something like that.
I think one of your favorites, Joe, is making yourself a eunuch for Christ, isn't it? I know that you love that one.
1912.
But what you're trying to do is essentially to reconcile a 2,000 or 3,000 year old set of doctrines with 3,000 years of history that followed from it, all of which goes to completely contradict most of the doctrines.
And it's even harder to do because once it becomes doctrine, it's immutable. And the whole purpose of the entire organization is to make sure that that creed stays the same.
Exactly.
You are, by definition, locked into total stagnation.
I think the thing that gets my attention most about it is the fact that the Christian religion holds itself up as the one that promotes peace, harmony, love, acceptance of all people, and yet it is the foundation through the conservative movement of the most vile intolerance of people who are different, people who are trying to immigrate to this country, people who don't speak the same language or look the same as you've ever seen. And you know, the contradiction, the hyperocracy of this whole thing has reached a point where nothing surprises us anymore.
The linchpin of the entire proposition is that you should be punished for all eternity for a thought crime, for a difference of opinion. I like the Dodgers, you like the Yankees. Where in the world is my crucifix?
You're obviously wrong. Yes.
You need to be punished.
Well, I
Have
think
a baseball bat.
the Christian faith comes down to one thing, and they can use all kinds of wording to make their point. But if you dedicate your life to Jesus and the Christian faith, then you're supposed to be rewarded with heaven. But if you fail to worship the dictator God who is going to torture for eternity the overwhelming majority of humanity in a lake of fire, if you reject that on moral grounds, then this so-called moral dictator is going to torture you for eternity in this lake of fire. So essentially, atheists are the only ones who have the ability to be moral, take a moral stand and say, I'm not going to worship a criminal dictator who tortures people for eternity.
It takes some courage to do that.
It takes a lot of courage.
And if you can punish people for what they think, name something that you can't punish them for. God help you for what you do.
I don't think that's mentioned in the Bible. There is one thing, though. There's reason for some degree of hope. Perhaps you might agree with, or maybe not. But Christianity, as we've said earlier, represents itself as being the movement for peace, love, kindness, and all of these good things that we would all agree are good things. And even though they fail to carry out or to synchronize their practices with that aspiration, the aspiration itself is enough to generate the kind of reaction that maybe you had when you were unable to reconcile the love, peace, and hope idea with the actual practices of the religion.
Well, that's exactly the problem, Jim, is that if you really care about peace and love and justice, social justice, then you look at Christianity. This Christianity is reality. This is not some imaginary mirage on the horizon. Christianity is the reality, and it's filled with hate and exclusion and
intolerance,
bigotry.
Right? Yep.
And you have to say, well,
Superiority complex.
this has to be what Christianity actually is. It is what you see, not what you hear, because people could say
Not
anything.
what you think it ought to be, or not what you wish it to be.
Correct. So people will abandon it primarily on the fact of it that it is essentially a fraud. It's essentially fraud. It's not about any of the things that it claims it's about. It's not about truth, not about love, not about justice.
Well, the good news. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, if it were only a fraud, I wouldn't even be here today. I wouldn't be worried about it.
I think the good news is that the young generation, the 20 to 30 somethings that are coming up now, recognize that atheism is not synonymous with communism, wife beaters, child molesters, and so on. I think because they're able to have a better understanding of the cosmos, the universe that we live in, and our place in it, and realize that these gods really are ancient ideas that serve no purpose anymore, that we can be ethical because we understand it's the best way to deal with each other. We don't need these dogmas and rules and rituals from the Bronze Age to tell us how to deal with each other. And then we see the hypocrisy of those who try to shove it down our throats, ignoring it anyway for corporate profits or control or power or whatever they want out of it. And so atheism is no longer really the stigma that it has been through the McCarthy era and the era when those of us in this room were younger people. And Atheists of Florida is an avenue for atheists to be around people who aren't going to be trying to shove you into a church every weekend and convince you of their primitive ideologies, which translates to a lifestyle free of these concepts of sin and the kind of oppression that you lived through, Jim, until you came to the point where you could
keep in mind that
reject all
we're not
religion.
promising you any kind of happiness, temporary or eternal. But we are promising you that at least you'll be on the right side of the issue and you'll be telling the truth.
That's the Atheist Forum for this week on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Tell all your worst enemies about our program, and I hope you'll join us again next week, next Friday afternoon, for another edition. Now, along with Jim Peters and Joe Reinhardt and our guest Jim Young, I'm Ed Golly, reminding you if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it. Just because somebody wrote it down,
Make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.